So temptation seems to play a heavier role in our society, in our culture, and in our media than does symbols of purity. People are able to identify the temptations in their life and in the world around us a lot easier than purity, simply because they seem to admit to us that that's just what we're surrounded by. And after we got past some of the guilt and the shame of trying to hide some of the temptations in their own personal lives, they were able to identify things that they struggle with. So as we look at these temptations and this taboo of a word, the sex, we start to have this question: is sex bad? If that's the world that we live in, is sex wrong? Where does that fit into our personal lives, especially as Christians? So is sex bad? Genesis 1:26-31. This time, God is making man. He's making Adam and Eve in this perfect place, this utopia of a place, this Garden of Eden. And surrounding the garden are all these beasts of the land, of the air, and of the sea. And instead of God telling Adam and Eve to stay put, because you have this perfect place, don't ruin it, don't let the world take it from you. He tells them to go. He gives them this mission to go and to rule over all these beasts. And not only that, he extends it further, and he says, populate and rule. So, I don't know about you, but the only way I know how to do that, besides maybe the stork bringing babies from a far-off land, or the factory underneath the hospital that makes babies, or maybe even the virgin birth, is to have sex. That's just the only way to do that. So, is the Bible telling us to go out and have sex? No. It's important to understand that the times were different, but there's a valuable lesson that can be learned from this idea or this concept of sex, because you see, Adam and Eve lived with God. They lived in this perfect place with God. But I'll say it one more time: they lived with God. So everything they did was in relation to God. And see, so within this relation, even God can command to essentially go out and populate the earth. So sex isn't bad if it's done in relation to God. And that becomes the important thing, is when things are done in relation to God. So when it's not used in context, this billboard sex, if that kind of grabs your attention, if you're tempted by some of these temptations of the world, then does that make you a weak person? Does that make you a weak Christian? Am I sinning because I'm tempted? Matthew 4:1-11. The story of Jesus in the desert. And he's been fasting for 40 days. And he runs into someone called Satan. And Satan comes to him and he starts tempting him on different levels. And I've heard it said that if you don't run into the devil from time to time, then you may be walking in the same direction. So Satan comes to Jesus and he's tempting him on different levels, and he's trying to get to him on every different level of his life, and he tells him to turn the rocks into bread. He tells him to jump off of a high tower, and the angels will catch him if he is who he says he is. And he takes him and shows him all the kingdoms of the earth, and he says, you can have all this if you just bow down and worship me. And Jesus has an interesting remark. He tells him in the scripture that all of his answers are kind of the same. He tells him, I'm good, man. I've got everything I need. I worship the one and only God. I've got everything I need. So he kind of turns all of his answers back into his relationship with God and his spiritual connection and his purpose that he's living out. We're meant to want certain things. We're meant to chow down on food. We're meant to enjoy the euphoric feeling that people try to obtain with drugs or alcohol, and we're even meant to have sex and like it. But it's all done in this relationship. So in a culture that's surrounded with ideas of building ourselves up, and every other rap song is about money and girls and shiny wheels, and every other song is about rappers being the boss because they have all the money and to do whatever they want. So at that point it becomes about power. So the question becomes, what has power over you? You see, so the authority of your life becomes where you place your focus. So that's how temptation works. When your focus is shifted from these things that God can give you, these gifts, to these pseudo gifts from the world, these counterfeits of the world. When you start giving into that, when your focus is shifted, that's when temptation can take hold of your life. So rock your job. So rock your job. So everyone's been in a car driving, and a fly flies in through your cracked window, and it's buzzing around. You start swerving, trying to shoo it out. You're rolling down windows, and the fly is just at the bottom of the glass, just beating its head there. And it'll do this for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And just to show how nerdy I am, I broke down the math. The average fruit fly lives for 21 days on average, and if it spends 15 minutes beating its head on the bottom of the glass trying to get out of your car, that it comes out to like 3 days of the fly's life. It seems like a long time. We're like, man, that fly is so dumb. If it would just sit back and look at the big picture, it could just see, how to get out. It would see its way out. But a lot of times, we go through the same struggles. We run into a problem, and it'll last for days, weeks, months, years of us just beating our head on the glass, instead of just like stepping back and taking in the full scope of the situation and really seeing that we have a way out. And a lot of times people say, man, if I could only be a fly on the wall for that. Well, sometimes we kind of are. 2 Timothy 3:4. The verses before this, they're talking about things that people struggle with, temptations. And it's funny because that list, applies directly into our lives today. But in verse 4, it talks about people's focus shifting from being, lovers of God to lovers of pleasure. And that seems to really sum it all up. Is once we lose this perspective of our relationship, of our our purpose, of our spiritual connection, of our purity, then that's when temptation really sinks in and becomes a relevant factor in our lives. So to really understand purity, you have to understand the threats of purity as a lifestyle. So just take a few seconds to look into the temptations of your own life.